Hello everyone. In our previous lesson, we learned how to use the positive non-past tense. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to use the negative non-past tense. So if you know how to make the positive non-past tense, making the negative non-past tense is pretty easy. You just take a verb that's been conjugated to the positive non-past tense, and you change mas to masen. Well, before we get into that, let's just have a quick refresher on the three types of verbs we have in Japanese. We have ru verbs, or ichidan verbs, u verbs, or godan verbs, and irregular verbs. Ru verbs always end in iru or eru. Some examples include kotaeru, which means to answer, shinjiru, which means to believe or to trust, and akeru, which means to open. So, you'll remember from our previous lesson that to conjugate a ru verb into its positive non-past tense, you drop the ru at the end of the verb and replace it with mas. If we want to change this to its negative tense, instead of replacing ru with mas, we replace it with masen. So, let's look at some examples. If we take akeru, to open, its positive non-past form would be akemasu. Its negative non-past form would be akemasen. Looking at shinjiru, to believe or to trust, its positive non-past tense would be shinjimasu, and its negative non-past tense would be shinjimasen. And for kotaeru, to answer, its positive non-past form would be kotaemasu, and its negative non-past form would be kotaemasen. So let's look at an example sentence. I do not or will not believe would be translated as watashi wa shinjimasen. Alright, now let's look at our second type of verb, u verbs. U verbs always end in u. They usually do not end in iru or eru, although there are some exceptions to this. Some examples of u verbs include tsukuru, to make, wakaru, to understand or to know, kawasu, to break, and narau, to listen. You should remember from our last lesson that in order to conjugate an u verb to its positive non-past form, we drop the u at the end of the word and replace it with imas. There are two exceptions to this. If an u verb ends in su, we drop the su and replace it with shimas. If an u verb ends in tsu, we drop tsu and replace it with chimas. If we want to change an u verb to its negative non-past form, instead of using mas, we use masen. So let's look at some examples. Tsukuru, to make. Its positive non-past form is tsukurimasu. Its negative non-past form is tsukurimasen. Wakaru, to understand or to know. Its positive non-past form is wakarimasu. Its negative non-past form is wakarimasen. Kawasu, to break. Its positive non-past form is kawashimasu. Its negative non-past form is kawashimasen. And narau, to learn. Its positive non-past form is naraimasu. Its negative non-past form is naraimasen. Let's look at an example sentence. You do not understand would be translated as anata wa wakarimasen. And our last verb type is irregular verbs. There are only two main irregular verbs, suru, to do, and kuru, to come. Suru's positive non-past form is shimasu, so naturally its negative non-past form is shimasen. Kuru's positive non-past form is kimasu, so its negative non-past form is kimasen. And let's take a look at one new suru verb. Denwa means phone in Japanese. If we combine this with suru, we get denwa suru, which means to phone or to call. The positive non-past form of this word is denwa shimasu. The negative non-past form is denwa shimasen. And our example sentence, Jill does not or will not call, would be translated as Jiru wa denwa shimasen. So now let's look at a few sentences using the things we've just learned. Watashi wa tobira o akemasen means I do or will not open the door. Tobira means door. Emiko-san wa anata no hanashi o shinjimasen means Emiko does or will not believe your story. Hanashi means story. You may remember from our last lesson that the verb hanasu means to speak. Hanashi is the noun form of hanasu. Inu wa anata no omocha o kowashimasen. This means the dog does or will not break your toy. Inu means dog. Omocha means toy. Tadahiro-san wa rekishi o naraimasen is Tadahiro does or will not learn history. Rekishi means history. Midori wa kosuke ni denwa shimasen is Midori does not or will not call Kosuke. Now you may have noticed that that sentence introduced a new particle, the particle ni. Ni is called our location particle. It can also be called the time particle because of the different functions that it serves in Japanese. You can think of ni as serving a similar function to several different prepositions in English, including in, on, at, or to. Interestingly also, you'll remember we learned the particle a in our previous lesson. Ni can often be used interchangeably with a. That is to say, if you would use a somewhere in a sentence, you can usually use ni. The opposite is not necessarily true. So, to look at another example of how to use ni, if we said, Watashi wa ichiji ni tabemasu, that would mean, I will eat at 1 o'clock. See that in this case, ni is analogous to the English word at. Also notice that ichiji means 1 o'clock. Don't worry too much about that. We're going to learn more about time in a future lesson. If we were to say, Watashi wa Soji-san no uchi ni ikimasu, that would mean I will go to Soji's house. Again, notice here that ni is being used in the same way as the word to would be used in English. Also notice that we could use a instead of ni in this sentence. So for example, if we were to rewrite that sentence with a, we would get Watashi wa Soji-san no uchi e ikimasu. It would have the exact same meaning. But you should also notice our first sentence where we're talking about time, we could not use a in that sentence. Ni can be used as a time particle, a cannot. And before we continue with our practice, we're going to learn just a little bit more vocabulary that we can use. Shitsumon means question. Bento means lunchbox. Kohi means coffee. This is another English loan word. And finally, geijutsu means art. So now let's practice making some sentences with the things that we've learned. I will not eat the lunchbox. Watashi wa bento o tabemasen. Professor Tanaka will not answer your question. Tanaka-sensei wa anata no shitsumon o kotaemasen. Moku does not drink coffee. Moku-san wa kohi o nomimasen. We do not trust mommy. Watashi tachi wa mami-san o shinjimasen. Chiaki does not understand art. Chiaki-san wa geijutsu o wakarimasen. And that's it for this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Ja, mata.